My name is Madison, and at 26, I thought I knew everything about family loyalty until my grandfather's funeral ripped that illusion apart. Standing in his mahogany paneled study 3 days after we buried him, I discovered documents that revealed a betrayal so shocking it made my knees buckle. My own mother had been systematically poisoning my relationship with Grandpa for years, manipulating his dementia to steal his $4,850,000 estate. But what I found in that final line changed everything. Hey everyone. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from around the world. If this hook already has you on the edge of your seat wondering how a family could unravel so dramatically, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this revenge story will take you on an emotional roller coaster you will never forget. Trust me, you need to stick around for the ending because karma has never been served colder than this. The morning after Grandpa's funeral, Mom insisted we clean out his house immediately. She arrived with empty boxes and a rental truck, her eyes gleaming with an urgency that should have warned me. "We need to get this done quickly, Madison," she said, already heading toward his bedroom. "The estate lawyer wants everything sorted before the reading next week." I had always been close to Grandpa William. He raised me during my teenage years when Dad left and Mom struggled with depression. Every Sunday we would sit on his porch swing, sharing stories and drinking his famous sweet tea. He taught me about investments, showed me his rare coin collection, and promised that someday I would inherit his wisdom along with his wealth. Those conversations shaped who I became, and his love gave me strength through my darkest moments. But over the past 2 years, something changed. Mom started visiting him alone, claiming I was too busy with work to spend time with him. She would return from these visits with stories about his declining health and concerning behavior. "He asked about you today, honey," she would say with fake sympathy. "But then he got confused and thought you were someone else. The dementia is getting worse." Gradually, my visits became less frequent. Every time I tried to see him, Mom would intervene with excuses. He was sleeping. He was having a bad day. The doctor said he needed quiet. When I finally did visit, Grandpa seemed distant and hurt. He would look at me with confusion and pain, asking why I never came around anymore. I assumed it was the dementia talking, never suspecting the web of lies being spun around us. Standing in his study that morning, surrounded by a lifetime of memories, I began going through his desk drawers. Mom was in the kitchen, loudly throwing away his medications and muttering about all the work ahead. In the bottom drawer, wedged behind old tax documents, I found a manila envelope with my name written in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. Inside were dozens of letters. Letters he had written to me but never sent. Letters asking why I had stopped visiting. Letters expressing his hurt and confusion about my sudden absence from his life. "My dearest Madison," one read, "Your mother came by today and said you are too busy with your new boyfriend to visit your old grandfather. I understand young people have their own lives, but I miss our Sunday talks terribly. I keep hoping you will surprise me one afternoon." Another letter, dated just 3 months before his death, broke my heart completely. "I changed my will today. Your mother convinced me that you no longer care about family traditions or our heritage. She says you told her the coin collection is old junk and the house is too much responsibility. I never thought I would see the day when my sweet granddaughter would become so cold, but perhaps your mother is right. Perhaps I should leave everything to her since she is the only one who truly cares about me now." My hands shook as I read letter after letter, each one revealing another piece of Mom's manipulation. She had systematically destroyed our relationship with carefully crafted lies. She told him I was embarrassed by his old-fashioned ways, that I complained about having to visit him, that I had even laughed about his memory problems with my friends. None of it was true, but Grandpa's dementia made him vulnerable to her poison. The final letter was the most devastating. Written just weeks before his death, it contained his last desperate attempt to understand what had gone wrong between us. "Madison, I do not know what I did to lose your love, but I am sorry. Your mother says you are angry about something I said, but I cannot remember what it was. I wish I could make it right. I wish things could be like they used to be. I love you more than you know, even if you no longer love me. Tears streaming down my face, I heard Mom calling from the kitchen. Madison, honey, did you find anything important in there? We really need to keep moving. Her voice carried a false sweetness that now made my stomach turn. How could she have done this? How could she have stolen the last years of our relationship with such calculated cruelty? But there was more. Hidden behind the letters, I found a small notebook where Grandpa had been tracking his interactions with both of us. His entries revealed a clear pattern. Every time I tried to call or visit, Mom would intercept the communication. She would tell him I had canceled last minute, that I was too busy, that I was dealing with personal problems, and did not want to be bothered. Meanwhile, she would tell me he was having bad days, or that the doctors recommended limiting visitors. The notebook also contained financial information that made my blood run cold. Over the past 18 months, Mom had been taking Grandpa to his bank and investment advisor, helping him make significant changes to his accounts. She had convinced him to name her as the primary beneficiary on several policies, and had even talked him into selling some of his most valuable assets at below-market prices to simplify his estate. Most shocking of all, I discovered that Mom had been recording their conversations. In a small digital recorder hidden in his desk, I found hours of audio where she carefully planted seeds of doubt about me. Her voice was patient and loving, as she poisoned his mind against me, always framing her lies as reluctant revelations from a concerned daughter-in-law who hated to be the bearer of bad news. As I sat in his study, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal, I felt a rage unlike anything I had ever experienced. This was not just theft or manipulation. This was emotional warfare against a vulnerable old man who had loved us both unconditionally. She had stolen his peace in his final years, robbed him of the joy he found in our relationship, and left him to die believing that his beloved granddaughter had abandoned him. But what destroyed me most was realizing that while I thought I was respecting his need for space and recovery, he was sitting in this same chair, writing letter after letter to a granddaughter he believed no longer cared about him. We had both been victims of her cruel manipulation, and now it was too late to make things right between us. The sound of Mom's footsteps approaching the study snapped me back to the present. I quickly gathered the letters and notebook, my mind racing with plans for revenge that would make her pay for every moment of pain she had caused both of us. "Find anything interesting in there, sweetheart?" Mom asked as she entered the study. Her tone carefully casual, but her eyes sharp as they scanned the room. I was sitting at Grandpa's desk with my back to her, having quickly hidden the evidence of her betrayal in my purse. "Just some old photos and papers," I replied, amazed at how steady my voice sounded, despite the fury burning in my chest. "Nothing that seems important." I turned to face her, with what I hoped was a neutral expression, studying this woman who had raised me with fresh eyes. How had I never noticed the calculating gleam that seemed to live permanently behind her smile? She moved closer to the desk, her fingers trailing across its surface possessively. "Well, we should probably donate most of this old furniture anyway. The house will sell faster if it is empty." Her casual mention of selling the house where Grandpa had lived for 47 years, where he had raised my father, where every room held precious memories, made my jaw clench. "Have you heard anything from the lawyer about when the will reading is scheduled?" I asked, testing her reaction. Mom's face lit up with poorly concealed excitement. "Actually, yes. Mr. Harrison called this morning and moved it up to tomorrow afternoon. Apparently, everything is pretty straightforward." She bustled around the room, suddenly energetic. "Your grandfather was very clear about his wishes in the end. Very clear indeed." That afternoon, I drove home to my apartment in a daze, the evidence of Mom's betrayal burning like a weight in my purse. I spread the letters across my kitchen table and began documenting everything methodically. If I was going to expose her, I needed to be smart about it. I could not let emotion cloud my judgment the way it had clouded Grandpa's. I started by creating a timeline of Mom's manipulation. Using Grandpa's notebook and the dates on his letters, I could track exactly when her campaign against me had begun and how it had escalated. The pattern was sickeningly clear. Every major change in his estate planning coincided with a period when she had increased her visits and decreased mine. Next, I researched elder abuse laws in our state. What Mom had done was not just morally reprehensible, it was criminal. Financial exploitation of an elderly person with cognitive impairment carried serious legal consequences, especially when the amounts involved reached into the millions. The recorded conversations alone would be enough to prove her intent and method. But I wanted more than just legal justice. I wanted everyone who mattered to see exactly who she really was. I wanted her humiliation to be as public and complete as the private hell she had created for Grandpa in his final years. I spent hours that evening listening to the recordings she had made. Her voice was honey-sweet as she systematically destroyed my relationship with the most important man in my life. She spoke with the patience of a devoted caregiver while planting poison that would fester in his confused mind for months. "Madison seems so stressed lately," she said in one recording. "She snapped at me yesterday when I mentioned your birthday coming up. I think she might be embarrassed about not having money for a nice gift. You know how proud she is." Grandpa's voice responded with concern and sadness, asking if there was anything he could do to help me. Mom quickly redirected him, suggesting that maybe it was better to give me some space during this difficult time. Another conversation revealed how she had convinced him to change his investment strategy. "The market is so unstable now, Dad," she said, using the affectionate title that now made my skin crawl. "Madison mentioned that her friends think your old school approach is too risky. Maybe we should move some things into safer accounts." She had used my name to validate her suggestions, making him believe that his own granddaughter was questioning his financial wisdom. The most painful recording was from just 2 weeks before his death. Grandpa's voice was weak and confused as he asked about me one final time. "Do you think Madison would come see me if I asked her directly?" he pleaded. Mom's response was swift and cruel. "Oh, Dad, I think that might make things worse. She told me last week that these visits are becoming too emotionally draining for her. Maybe it is better to just let her live her life." As I listened to his heartbroken acceptance of her lies, I made a decision that would change everything. I was not just going to expose Mom's theft and manipulation. I was going to make sure that everyone understood exactly what kind of person she was and what she had stolen from both of us. The will reading tomorrow would be her moment of triumph, the culmination of years of calculated abuse. But it was also going to be the perfect stage for her downfall. I called my best friend Sarah, who worked as a paralegal at a prestigious law firm. Without revealing the full scope of what I had discovered, I asked her about the legality of recording conversations in our state. She confirmed that our state was a one-party consent jurisdiction, meaning that as long as one person in the conversation consented to the recording, it was legal evidence. "Why are you asking?" Sarah wanted to know. "Is everything okay with your family?" "I will tell you everything soon," I promised. "But right now I need to know, if someone had evidence of elder abuse and financial exploitation, what would be the best way to present it to ensure maximum legal impact?" Sarah's tone became serious immediately. "Madison, if you are dealing with elder abuse, you need to report it to Adult Protective Services immediately. And depending on the financial amounts involved, the FBI might need to be contacted too. This is not something you handle on your own." After hanging up with Sarah, I spent the rest of the evening preparing for tomorrow's confrontation. I made copies of all the evidence and stored the originals in a safety deposit box. I contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and scheduled an appointment for the day after the will reading. I also reached out to Grandpa's doctor to inquire about his mental capacity during the time Mom was manipulating his estate planning. As I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, I thought about Grandpa sitting in his study, writing those heartbreaking letters to me. He had died believing that I had abandoned him, that his love and guidance had meant nothing to me. I could not bring him back or give him the peace he deserved, but I could make sure that his death was not the final victory in Mom's cruel game. Tomorrow she would walk into that lawyer's office expecting to claim her stolen prize. Instead, she was going to face the consequences of every lie she had told and every moment of pain she had caused. The last line of Grandpa's will was going to change everything, and I was ready to make sure the whole world understood exactly what that meant. The next morning dawned gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly as I prepared for the will reading. I dressed carefully in the navy blue dress Grandpa had always complimented, a choice that felt like armor as I prepared for battle. The evidence was organized in my briefcase, copies distributed to safe locations, and my plan crystallized into sharp focus. Mom called while I was having coffee, her voice bubbling with false excitement. "Are you ready for today, honey? I know this is going to be emotional, but we will get through it together. Your grandfather loved us both so much." The hypocrisy in her words made my hand tighten around the phone, but I kept my voice steady. "I will meet you at Mr. Harrison's office," I replied. "I have a few errands to run first." What I actually had was a meeting with Detective Rodriguez from the Financial Crimes Unit, who had agreed to review my evidence on an expedited basis, given the timing of the will reading. Detective Rodriguez was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who listened with growing incredulity as I played selected portions of Mom's recordings. "This is one of the most systematic cases of elder abuse I have seen in 20 years, she said grimly. "The premeditation here is staggering. She did not just steal from him, she tortured him psychologically." We spent 2 hours going through the evidence methodically. The detective was particularly interested in the timeline I had created, which clearly showed how each of Mom's manipulation tactics corresponded with changes to Grandpa's estate planning. The recordings provided irrefutable proof of intent, while the letters showed the devastating emotional impact on the victim. "We will need to move carefully," Detective Rodriguez explained. "If she realizes we are investigating, she might try to hide assets or destroy evidence." "Are you comfortable wearing a wire to the will reading? Anything she says about her methods or motivations could strengthen our case significantly." The thought of recording Mom's triumph made my stomach turn, but I agreed immediately. This woman had stolen the last precious years of my relationship with Grandpa. If I could help ensure she faced full legal consequences, I would do whatever was necessary. By the time I arrived at Harrison and Associates, I was wired for sound and ready for war. The law office was intimidatingly elegant, with dark wood paneling and leather-bound books that reminded me painfully of Grandpa's study. Mom was already seated in the conference room chatting animatedly with Mr. Harrison about the weather and her plans for handling the estate. She looked up as I entered, her smile bright but her eyes calculating as they assessed my mood. "There is my beautiful daughter," she said warmly, rising to embrace me. "Are you holding up okay, sweetheart? I know how much you loved your grandfather." The casual reference to my love for Grandpa, the love she had systematically poisoned and destroyed, nearly broke my composure. But I forced myself to return her hug and smile as if nothing had changed between us. Mr. Harrison was a distinguished man with silver hair who had been Grandpa's lawyer for over 30 years. He clearly knew the family history well, and his expression carried a sadness that went beyond professional sympathy. "Before we begin," he said carefully, "I want you both to know that your grandfather spoke about each of you frequently during our final meetings. His love for his family was always evident even as his health declined." Mom leaned forward eagerly. "He was such a wonderful man. Even when the dementia was affecting him so badly, he never lost his kind heart. I tried my best to take care of him in those final months, especially when Madison was dealing with her own challenges." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that I felt genuine admiration for her skill, even as I hated everything about her. She had crafted a narrative where she was the devoted daughter-in-law, sacrificing to care for a difficult elderly man while his ungrateful granddaughter was too selfish to help. It was a beautiful story and completely false. Mr. Harrison's expression flickered with something I could not quite identify before he opened the legal folder in front of him. "Your grandfather's will underwent several revisions in his final year," he began formally. "The document we are reading today represents his final wishes, as expressed to me 6 weeks before his death." Mom sat straighter, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I could see the tension in her shoulders despite her attempts to appear calm. This was the moment she had been working toward for years, the payoff for all her careful manipulation and psychological warfare. The bulk of William Morrison's estate, including his investment portfolio, real estate holdings, and personal property, valued at approximately $4,850,000, is bequeathed to. Mr. Harrison paused, his eyes meeting mine briefly, before continuing. His beloved daughter-in-law, Patricia Morrison, in recognition of her devoted care during his declining years. Mom let out a small gasp of surprise that was perfectly performed. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. "I never expected. I was just doing what family does for each other." But I could see the triumph blazing in her eyes, the satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly. The detective's wire felt heavy against my skin as I watched her performance. Every word was being recorded, adding to the evidence that would ultimately destroy her. But I needed more than just her false modesty. I needed her to reveal the methods behind her success. However, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice taking on a different tone. "There are several specific provisions and conditions that must be addressed before the inheritance can be transferred." Mom's smile faltered slightly. "Conditions. Your grandfather was quite specific about certain concerns that had arisen during his final months. He wanted to ensure that all family relationships had been handled appropriately and that no undue influence had affected his decisions." I watched color drain from Mom's face as the implications sank in. "What kind of concerns?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled, but her knuckles white where she gripped her purse. Mr. Harrison pulled out another document. He requested that before the estate transfer we conduct a formal review of all communications and interactions between family members during the 18 months preceding his death. He was particularly interested in understanding why certain relationships had deteriorated so dramatically. The room fell silent, except for the soft sound of rain against the windows. Mom's breathing had become shallow, and I could see her mind racing as she tried to understand what was happening. This was not the triumphant moment she had envisioned. "Furthermore," the lawyer continued relentlessly, "William specifically requested that we investigate any recordings or documentation that might exist regarding conversations about family dynamics during his period of cognitive decline. He felt strongly that the truth about these relationships needed to be established before his final wishes could be honored." Mom stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice shook. "My father-in-law was suffering from dementia. Obviously, he was confused and paranoid in his final months. Whatever he thought he remembered about family relationships, we cannot take that seriously." But Mr. Harrison was not finished. "Actually, Patricia, there is one final provision that your father-in-law insisted we include. He wanted me to read this last section verbatim, regardless of how the rest of the will was received." He lifted a single sheet of paper, and I could see Grandpa's distinctive handwriting covering the bottom half. These are his exact words, written in his own hand and witnessed by my staff. "If any evidence emerges that family relationships were damaged through deliberate manipulation or deception during my illness, then all provisions of this will become null and void. In such cases, my entire estate should pass to my granddaughter Madison, who I pray will forgive a foolish old man for believing lies about her character." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom sank back into her chair as if her strings had been cut, staring at the lawyer with undisguised horror. Her perfect plan, years in the making, was crumbling in front of her eyes, and I had not even played my hand yet. "You know what, I can already tell this is going to be one of those revenge stories that will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. The next part is where everything explodes, and trust me, you are not ready for what happens when Madison finally reveals what she knows. Make sure you stay tuned because the confrontation that is about to unfold will leave you speechless." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire ready to snap. Mom's face had gone ashen, her carefully constructed facade cracking as the implications of Grandpa's final provisions sank in. Mr. Harrison watched her with professional detachment, but I could see a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes that told me he had suspected something was wrong all along. Evidence. Mom's voice came out as barely a whisper. What kind of evidence could there possibly be? Dad was confused, paranoid. He was imagining things that never happened. This was my moment. I reached into my briefcase with steady hands, pulling out the manila envelope that contained her destruction. Actually, Grandpa was more lucid than you thought, and he documented everything. I placed the first letter on the conference table. This is a letter he wrote to me 3 months before his death, asking why I had stopped visiting him. He talks about how you told him I was too busy with my boyfriend to spend time with my old grandfather. Mom's eyes fixed on the letter with growing horror. Madison, honey, you do not understand. His memory was so bad toward the end. He was mixing things up, creating false memories. Really? I pulled out the second letter. Then explain this one where he writes about you telling him I was embarrassed by his old-fashioned ways. Or this one where you convinced him I had laughed about his memory problems with my friends. I spread letter after letter across the table, each one revealing another layer of her systematic manipulation. You see, Grandpa might have had dementia, but he was not stupid. He started writing these letters because something felt wrong about our relationship falling apart so suddenly. He could not understand why his beloved granddaughter would abandon him without explanation. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, examining the letters with growing interest. The handwriting was unmistakably Grandpa's, shaky but determined. Each page was dated and detailed, creating a heartbreaking timeline of confusion and pain. But I was just getting started. I pulled out the small digital recorder and set it on the table. Grandpa also started recording some of your conversations, Mom. He was trying to understand what was happening to his family. Mom's face went white. You cannot possibly have. Those conversations were private. Were they? I pressed play on the first recording. Mom's honey-sweet voice filled the room as she told Grandpa that I had called his coin collection old junk and complained about having to visit him. Her tone was perfectly sympathetic as she delivered each poisonous lie. Turn it off, Mom whispered, but I continued playing. Recording after recording revealed her systematic campaign of psychological warfare against a vulnerable old man. Her voice remained loving and patient as she destroyed the most important relationship in my life with surgical precision. This is illegal, she said desperately. You cannot record someone without their consent. Actually, I can, I replied calmly. Our state is a one-party consent jurisdiction. Since Grandpa consented to these recordings, they are perfectly legal. And they prove beyond any doubt that you deliberately manipulated a man with cognitive impairment for financial gain. Mr. Harrison was furiously taking notes, his professional demeanor shifting into something much more serious. Patricia, these recordings suggest systematic elder abuse and financial exploitation. I am legally obligated to report this to the authorities. You do not need to, I said quietly. I already have. Mom's head snapped toward me, her mask finally slipping completely. What did you do? I met with Detective Rodriguez from the Financial Crimes Unit this morning. She found your methods quite educational. Oh, and Mom, I am wearing a wire right now. Everything you have said in this room has been recorded as evidence. The transformation was instantaneous. The loving mother disappeared entirely, replaced by something cold and calculating. You little bitch, she snarled. Do you have any idea what I sacrificed for you? What I went through raising you alone when your father left? That money should be mine. I earned it. By torturing an old man with dementia? I stood up, my voice rising. By making him believe his granddaughter had abandoned him, by stealing the last precious years of our relationship. He was going to die anyway, she snapped. At least this way. The money stays in the family instead of being wasted on some nursing home. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. Patricia, I strongly advise you to stop talking immediately and contact an attorney. But Mom was beyond caring about legal advice. Years of careful manipulation had given way to raw fury. You think you are so smart, Madison? You think you have won something. That old man never cared about you the way he pretended. He was just using you to feel important, to have someone worship his outdated ideas about family and tradition. That is not true, I said, but my voice wavered. Is not it? She leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice. Why do you think it was so easy to turn him against you? Deep down, he knew you were just humoring him all those years. When I told him you were embarrassed by him, part of him believed it, because he had always wondered if your affection was real. The words hit me like physical blows, but I forced myself to remember the letters. Whatever doubts Grandpa might have had, his love for me had been genuine. The pain in his writing proved that. The difference between us, Mom, is that my relationship with Grandpa was built on truth. Yours was built on lies. And lies always collapse eventually. Detective Rodriguez chose that moment to enter the conference room, flanked by two uniformed officers. Patricia Morrison, you are under arrest for financial exploitation of an elderly person, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. Mom's face cycled through shock rage and finally a strange kind of relief as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. You have no idea what you have started, she told me as they led her away. Family is supposed to protect each other, not destroy each other over money. You destroyed our family the moment you decided to torture a dying man for profit, I called after her. This is not about money, this is about justice. After she was gone, Mr. Harrison and I sat in stunned silence. The conference room felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a poisonous presence had been lifted from the air. Your grandfather would be proud of you, the lawyer said finally. He suspected something was wrong but could not prove it. That final provision in his will was his way of ensuring the truth would eventually come out. I looked down at the letters scattered across the table, each one a testament to an old man's love and confusion. I just wish I had figured it out sooner. I wish I could have protected him. You did protect him, Mr. Harrison said gently. Maybe not in life, but you protected his memory and his intentions. You made sure his real wishes were honored. As I gathered up the evidence that had brought my mother down, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but it could not bring back the lost time or heal the wounds that had been inflicted. Still, somewhere in the universe, I hoped Grandpa finally knew the truth about why I had seemed to abandon him. And I hoped he understood that my love for him had never wavered even when I did not know I was being kept away. The weeks following Mom's arrest passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and family devastation that spread like wildfire through our small community. The story of Patricia Morrison's systematic elder abuse made front-page news in our local paper, with headlines that read, "Daughter-in-law's elaborate scheme exposed," and "Million-dollar manipulation uncovered after death." I had underestimated how quickly word would spread. Within days, everyone who had known our family was talking about the case. The grocery store clerks whispered when I walked by. Former neighbors called with awkward condolences mixed with morbid curiosity. Some people were supportive, praising my courage for exposing the truth. Others suggested I should have handled things privately, that airing family business in court was somehow worse than the crimes that had been committed. The legal process moved faster than I had expected. Mom's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but Detective Rodriguez had built an airtight case using the recordings, letters, and financial records. The evidence was so overwhelming that even Mom's lawyer admitted privately that fighting the charges would be futile. During the preliminary hearing, I watched Mom sit beside her attorney, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen her. She had lost weight in jail, and her usually perfect appearance had deteriorated into something hollow and defeated. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for what our family had become. Her former friends began distancing themselves immediately. Women who had praised her devotion to Grandpa during his illness now acted as if they had always suspected something was wrong. I always thought she seemed a little too eager to handle everything, one neighbor told a reporter. Poor William probably did not know what was happening to him. The financial unraveling was equally swift and devastating. Mom had not just stolen Grandpa's money, she had spent most of it. Her lavish lifestyle over the past 2 years, the expensive vacations she had taken while claiming to be caring for him, the designer clothes and jewelry she had justified as rewards for her sacrifice. All of it had been funded by money stolen from a dying man. The house she had been living in, which she had convinced Grandpa to sign over to her 6 months before his death, would have to be sold to pay restitution. Her car, her jewelry, her investment accounts, everything would be liquidated to recover whatever was possible of his estate. She had gambled everything on never being caught, and she had lost spectacularly. But the most devastating consequence was the complete destruction of her relationship with my father. He flew in from Seattle when news of the arrest reached him, and I watched a man I barely knew anymore struggle to understand how his ex-wife had become capable of such calculated cruelty. I knew she could be manipulative, he told me over coffee in a quiet corner of the courthouse cafeteria. That is part of why our marriage failed. But this, using an old man's illness against him, I never imagined she could sink this low. Dad had his own guilt to work through. He admitted that he should have stayed in closer touch with Grandpa, should have noticed something was wrong when my visits suddenly stopped. I was so focused on building my new life in Seattle that I let her handle everything here, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I should have protected him too. The extended family reaction was equally painful to watch. Grandpa's sister, my great-aunt Helen, was horrified when she learned what had happened. Patricia always seemed so devoted, she said during one of our phone calls. She would tell us how hard it was to manage William's care, especially with you being so busy. We all felt sorry for her. One by one, family members came forward with their own pieces of the puzzle. Mom had told Aunt Helen that I was struggling with depression and could not handle seeing Grandpa decline. She had told Grandpa's brother that I was embarrassed by the family's modest background now that I had a college education. She had told the church ladies that I was dating someone who did not approve of spending time with elderly relatives. Each revelation added another layer to the web of lies she had spun around my absence. She had been so thorough, so careful to tailor her stories to what each person wanted to believe, that no one had thought to compare notes or question her version of events. The most heartbreaking conversation came when I finally visited Grandpa's doctor, the neurologist who had been treating his dementia. Dr. Chen had been wondering about my sudden absence from appointments too, especially since Grandpa had always spoken so lovingly about me during his visits. Your grandfather asked about you every single time he came in, Dr. Chen told me in his quiet office. He was always worried that he had done something to upset you. I suggested that your mother arrange a family meeting to discuss his care, but she said you were not ready for that level of involvement yet. Even his medical care had been affected by Mom's manipulation. Dr. Chen had adjusted his treatment approach based on the false information she provided about family dynamics and support systems. Grandpa had been more isolated and confused than necessary because his doctor believed his primary family relationship had deteriorated. His cognitive function was actually quite good in many areas, Dr. Chen explained. Dementia affects different people differently, and your grandfather retained a lot of his emotional intelligence and relationship awareness. That is probably why her lies were so devastating to him psychologically. The thought that Grandpa had understood on some level that something was wrong, that he had been aware enough to feel the pain of my supposed rejection, made everything worse. He had not been a confused old man living in a fog. He had been a loving grandfather trying to understand why his world was falling apart. As the legal process continued, I found myself becoming the reluctant spokesperson for elder abuse awareness in our community. Reporters wanted to interview me about the warning signs people should watch for. Social workers asked me to speak at training sessions about the psychological tactics abusers use. Support groups for families affected by elder abuse reached out for my perspective. I did not want to be the poster child for this cause, but I felt an obligation to Grandpa's memory to help prevent other families from experiencing what we had been through. If sharing my story could help even one person recognize the signs of manipulation and abuse, then perhaps some meaning could be found in our tragedy. The hardest part was living with the knowledge that Mom had been right about one thing. I could not get those lost years back. All the Sunday afternoon conversations we had missed, all the wisdom and stories that had died with Grandpa, all the moments of connection and love that she had stolen from us, were gone forever. No amount of justice could resurrect those precious memories or heal the wounds her lies had inflicted on both of us. 6 months after Mom's sentencing to 8 years in federal prison for elder abuse and fraud, I found myself sitting on Grandpa's porch swing, which I had moved to my new home, the house where he had lived for nearly 5 decades. The irony was not lost on me that I was now living in the very place Mom had tried so hard to claim through her web of lies and manipulation. The legal settlement had been more complex than anyone anticipated. While most of Grandpa's liquid assets had been recovered, the emotional damage assessment had required extensive psychological evaluation and testimony. The court had ultimately awarded me not just his original estate, but additional damages for the intentional infliction of emotional distress on both Grandpa and myself. More importantly, the case had set a legal precedent for prosecuting psychological elder abuse that went beyond simple financial exploitation. The recordings Mom had made of her manipulation sessions were now being used in law enforcement training programs across 3 states. Her cruelty had inadvertently created tools to help protect other vulnerable seniors from similar predators. I had transformed Grandpa's study into a memorial space where I kept his letters, his coin collection, and photographs from our Sunday afternoon talks. Reading his words regularly helped me understand that our relationship had been real and precious, regardless of how it had been poisoned in his final years. His love had been genuine, and so had mine. The healing process had been complicated by an unexpected discovery. While going through his financial records for the court proceedings, I found evidence that Grandpa had known something was wrong long before his death. He had been secretly consulting with a different attorney about changing his will again, concerned about irregularities in family relationships that he wanted investigated. His final provision about evidence emerging had not been paranoid rambling from a confused mind. It had been the calculated trap of a shrewd man who suspected he was being manipulated but needed proof to act. Even with dementia affecting his short-term memory, his fundamental intelligence and intuition had remained sharp enough to sense Mom's deception. Dr. Chen had been right about Grandpa retaining his emotional awareness. The letters he had written to me were not the confused ramblings of a sick man. They were the desperate attempts of someone who knew something was terribly wrong but could not identify the source. He had died planning his own posthumous investigation into the destruction of our relationship. This revelation changed everything about how I understood his final years. He had not been a helpless victim being slowly poisoned against me. He had been a clever old man gathering evidence while pretending to be more confused than he actually was. The recordings Mom thought she was making for her own protection had actually been part of his plan to document her manipulation. The realization that Grandpa had been fighting back even while appearing to succumb to her lies filled me with a pride and admiration that helped heal some of the deepest wounds from our ordeal. He had protected me and his legacy in the only way available to him, using his supposed weakness as a weapon against his abuser. My relationship with Dad had evolved in unexpected ways too. His guilt over failing to protect Grandpa had motivated him to relocate back from Seattle, and we had been rebuilding the connection that had been damaged when he left years earlier. He helped me renovate Grandpa's house, and we spent hours talking through family history I had never known. "Your grandfather always said you had his stubborn streak," Dad told me one afternoon as we painted the kitchen. He would be proud of how you fought for the truth. He always believed that justice was worth pursuing, even when it was difficult or costly. The extended family had rallied around me in ways I had not expected. Aunt Helen visited monthly, sharing stories about Grandpa's younger years and helping me understand the family traditions Mom had tried to destroy. His brother, Uncle Frank, had given me Grandpa's war medals and his father's pocket watch, saying they belonged with someone who truly understood their significance. Most surprisingly, some of Mom's former friends had reached out to apologize for believing her lies about me. Margaret, who lived next door to Grandpa, admitted that she had been uncomfortable when I stopped visiting, but had accepted Mom's explanations without question. "I should have called you directly," she said during an awkward coffee meeting. "I should have trusted my instincts instead of accepting her stories. Your grandfather talked about you constantly, and it never made sense that you would just abandon him like that." The community response had been largely positive, though some people still whispered about family drama and questioned whether I should have handled things privately. I learned to ignore the judgment of people who prioritized appearances over justice. What mattered was that the truth had been revealed and that Grandpa's real wishes had been honored. I had also found unexpected purpose in elder advocacy work. The local Adult Protective Services office had asked me to join their advisory board, and I had been working with them to develop better protocols for detecting psychological abuse. My experience had shown that emotional manipulation could be just as devastating as physical or financial abuse, but it was much harder to identify and prove. Speaking at caregiver training sessions had become a regular part of my routine. I shared the warning signs I wished I had recognized: the gradual isolation of the elder from other family members, the caregiver who always had explanations for why relationships were deteriorating, the sudden changes in estate planning that coincided with increased caregiver influence. Trust your instincts. I would tell audiences, if something feels wrong about family dynamics changing, suddenly investigate. Do not assume that conflict is natural or that the caregiver's version of events is complete. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is ask hard questions. As I sat on that porch swing watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, I felt Grandpa's presence more strongly than I had since his death. The house held memories of our conversations, but more than that, it held the continuation of values he had tried to teach me about integrity, perseverance, and fighting for what was right. The $4,850,000 was nice, of course. It provided financial security and allowed me to honor his memory through charitable giving and community involvement. But the real inheritance was the lesson that love and truth were worth fighting for, even when the cost seemed impossibly high. Mom would be eligible for parole in 6 years, but she had lost everything that mattered: her freedom, her relationships, her reputation, and any chance of a comfortable retirement. The money she had stolen so carefully was gone, spent on temporary pleasures that had evaporated as quickly as morning dew. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what was right? Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted had been systematically lying to you for years? I never imagined that my own mother would be capable of such calculated cruelty, but this experience taught me that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who know exactly how to exploit our love and trust. If my story helps even one person recognize the signs of elder abuse or find the courage to speak up when something feels wrong, then perhaps some good can come from our family's painful journey. Please share this story with anyone who might need to hear it, and remember to like and subscribe if these kinds of real-life justice stories resonate with you. Thank you for listening to my family story, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to enable abuse, even when it means standing up to the people who raised us. The truth always finds a way to surface, and justice, though sometimes delayed, is always worth pursuing.